All right, easy go. We got this. I'm joining all the panelists. Chat is on. Should be able to share your video as soon as you leave Crowdcast. You can go ahead and add people now.
All right, let's wait for everyone else and get our screen share up. And then we will start inviting attendees. And we should probably start from the content after the Cram quiz. So we'll just backtrack.
Okay, I'm gonna make you a host and I'm gonna jump out to go help Liz.
No problem. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thanks.
Should we start sharing? Oh, okay.
Sandra, is this good?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right, we have 4 out of 5. So yeah, Sandra, we're just gonna start from after the Cram quiz.
Okay. Oh, and for my part, would you be okay with screen sharing? Because I only have like 3 slides after yours. Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm changing the settings on the Q&A so everyone can answer them. And then let me make sure the chat is set as well. Panelists can chat with everyone. Attendees can chat with everyone. Okay, I'm gonna post the link. And they should be joining us momentarily.
Welcome back, everyone. We're gonna wait a few more minutes for everyone to slowly file in, but thank you guys so much for being so patient and accommodating and willing to join the Zoom while we got all of our tech issues figured out. But we are gonna go back a little bit, and I'm going to start off from right after the Cram quiz, just for those who had technical difficulties starting from around the Cram quiz, just in case they missed this. So we are going back a couple slides. Just to make sure everyone gets all the information. But we'll wait a couple more minutes till we get some more people, and then we'll get started with measuring public opinion. Right, I'll give it like 30 more seconds and we'll get started. I know some people are getting the Zoom link through email, so maybe they're taking a little bit longer. Okay, are we feeling good about getting started again? We are starting back a couple slides, so that will give people also a chance to come in and not miss too much because we're gonna run it back a few minutes. Okay, perfect. So measuring public opinion, essentially we're gonna talk about, we just covered how people develop these opinions, these ideologies that affect public policy, affect candidates. And now we're going to talk about how we measure that opinion. We have hundreds of millions of people living in the US, so how are we able to understand what they're thinking, what issues they care about, what candidates are going to vote for? All of that, there's a lot of processes that go into that, and we're going to learn some of those important terms and key concepts. So, public opinion data can affect elections and policy debates and is influenced by different types of scientific polls. So, polling is a scientific process. I know that this is not a science class, but this is something that is it's obviously numbers based, and there's a lot of scientific considerations to make sure that you get valid and accurate results when doing polls. So, a lot of things can lead to sort of faulty polling results. And we're going to get to that, but first, we're going to cover the four main types of polls. So, first off, we have opinion polls, which measure public opinion on various issues, like the name implies, essentially how people are feeling about different, things that are being discussed in public policy and politics. So, a poll measuring how people feel about abortion or how people feel about certain healthcare policy, that would be an opinion poll. Benchmark polls create baseline views of a candidate. So when a candidate is thinking about running and they want to know how they're doing, how people feel about them, they would do a benchmark poll. Also, quick reminder that we do have a Q&A feature on Zoom as well, not just on Crowdcast. So if y'all have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and my other hosts will be there answering them. So if you have any questions that come up while we're going through these slides, please put them in there. And then we, of course, also have the chat, which we love. Then we have tracking polls, which follow how views of a candidate change during a campaign. So, is popularity up or down? How are they doing in the polls? That's what it refers to. And then exit polls collect data on why people voted the way they did. So, exit polls are typically conducted outside of a polling place. So, let's say you go in to vote on election day and you're heading out, there might be people there from different news outlets or polling companies conducting these exit polls, asking you why you voted the way you did. And then when election results come out later that night, the data from exit polls is usually used to try to explain why a certain candidate won or why certain things happened in the election. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. All right. Public opinion data can affect elections and policy debates and is influenced by polling methodology. So, like I talked about, polling is a very scientific thing, and we have to consider a lot of things to make sure that we get accurate polling results. Obviously, when polling, you're working with thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, you're working with a lot of different answers, and you're working with human beings who are answering questions that are not typically not just a simple yes or no, or even if they are yes or no, the way that you ask a question can have an impact. So these are some different considerations that are important when thinking about whether a poll was conducted properly. So first off is accurate sampling methods, including a margin of error. So ensuring that, a margin of error basically acknowledges that a poll is not perfect and can have a margin, whether up or down, of what could be a actual correct number. And then accurate sampling methods. So out of the entire population of the United States, we obviously can't sample every single person. So, how do we determine those samples? How do we pick the proper group of people to make sure that the polling that we're doing is an accurate representation of the country as a whole? So are we going to just choose, random people across the board? Are we going to first make groups or do stratified sampling like we covered in the Cram quiz? and then, choose people from each separate group. All of those different things are important when ensuring that we get accurate polls. Next up is neutral framing of questions. So again, with political polling and political questions, the way you ask something can have a huge impact on how people respond and how they feel about it. So the example I used was if you're doing an abortion or a poll on abortion opinions, if you ask someone, are you pro-abortion versus if you ask them, are you pro-choice? You're asking more, that's sort of a different ways of asking a similar question, and you can get vastly different results based on just how you ask that and your word choice. So that's really important when ensuring that a poll is done accurately, is that the people conducting a poll don't have a certain agenda in mind or are not trying to get a certain answer and are using unbiased and specific wording to ensure that people are just responding to the question, not to the opinions of the person asking the question. And then accurate reporting, so clear reporting and conclusions that can be supported by data. So this essentially means, reporting your methodology, how you came to the samples that you came to, how you asked the questions. And that way people are able to see, how you got this data and if this data is data that they're willing to trust. We can move on to the next slide. All right, evaluating data. So the relationship between scientific polling and elections and policy debates is affected by both the importance of public opinion as a source of political influence in a given election or policy debate, and the reliability and veracity of public opinion data. So to sort of break that down, that first bullet point is essentially saying how important is public opinion in this given discussion. So the example I used was, let's say that a public or a presidential approval rating, a poll is done in the first year of a president's term, and they're getting pretty low numbers. This might not have the biggest impact on that president's policy agenda because they're in their first year of their term, so they still have 3 years before they have to think about re-election. So in that case, in that given context, polling data isn't the most important thing. Whereas if we were, let's say right now, when we're just a few months out from election day, and a congressperson is supporting a certain bill and polling on that bill has really low numbers, let's say only 20% of Americans support it, and that congressman is currently actively campaigning for re-election in just a few months, that might have a huge impact, and that might cause the congressman to step back from supporting that legislation. So essentially, how big of an impact does the public's opinion and the voters' opinion have on a certain elected official or a certain policy debate? And then the reliability and veracity of that data. So essentially, is the data reliable? Is it trustworthy? And do people trust the data? So I talked about how in 2016, a lot of the polling that was done for the presidential election was sort of criticized afterwards because a lot of it was inaccurate or kind of gave people a sense or a false sense of what was actually going to happen during the election and wasn't, the most accurate results. And so this gave people a sort of mistrust of polls. So come 2020, a lot of people were hesitant to even look at presidential polls because they felt that they had lost that reliability and that it wasn't the best source to look at when trying to figure out who's going to win the election. So essentially, do people trust it, and do they feel that the data they're being given by these polls is reliable? Next slide. All right, ideologies of the political parties. So I'm sure we all more or less know these, but the Democratic Party, or the capital letter D, or Dem, generally align more closely to liberal ideological positions. So to the left, and then the Republican Party aligns more closely with conservative ideological positions. So kind of the things that we typically, think about. Republicans are focused on, let's say, lowering taxes, where Democrats might be focused on expanding access to healthcare. Think big government versus small government. In terms of social issues, think about more conservative traditional values versus more progressive values. And those are kind of the big ideas. And all of those words that you see there behind the little animals are kind of words that you can think to just kind of quickly have off the top of your head that you can associate with the two parties. We can move on to the next one. Ideology and policymaking. So the US is a democracy with diverse society Public policies generated at any given time reflect the attitudes and beliefs of citizens who choose to participate in politics at that time. So we had a question about that on the Cram quiz. And this is basically saying that people's opinions at a given time are what impact public policy and the laws that are getting passed at that time as well. So that's why when we look back at history, the sort of general culture of a time is also reflected in the laws and policy and court decisions of that time. So I think of the 70s, which we sort of associate with hippies and a kind of very progressive time culturally and socially. And then we see that reflected also in the laws that were getting passed at the time, the Supreme Court decisions of the time. So because we have a democracy, what the people are thinking at the time has a huge impact on the government at the time. So the balancing dynamic of individual liberty and government efforts to promote stability and order has been reflected in policy debates and their outcomes over time. So freedom of speech versus hate speech laws. Policy debates surrounding hate speech laws often involve balancing individual liberties such as freedom of speech with government efforts to promote social stability and prevent discrimination or incitement of violence. So this is kind of circling back to a constant and very common debate that we have in politics and kind of an overarching theme of our debates in politics, which is individual liberty versus government. And this again ties back to the political parties. So again, the individual liberties side sort of aligns more with the Republicans, and the government efforts aligns more with the Democrats. And that's kind of the constant with almost any political issue that we talk about, whether nowadays or 200 years ago, they can more or less be tied back to this idea of less government and individual liberty, or more government and more sort of stability and equality across the board, and how those two competing forces play out. So with freedom of speech versus hate speech, it's that same thing. To what extent are we able to say whatever we want? And up until the point where it begins causing harm to others or begins having effects outside of just ourselves. So that's kind of what that is talking about. And again, with ideology, the two main things I'm thinking about ideology is like less government, more government, and how those then bleed into all of the different policy debates that we have. We can move on to the next one. All right, drug legalization versus public health. So that's a really recent discussion that we're having in politics over the past decade or so. So policy discussions regarding the legalization of certain drugs, such as marijuana, involve balancing individual liberty with government efforts to promote public health, reduce drug-related harm, and prevent substance abuse. So there's there's people advocating for legalizing drugs from the criminal justice reform point of view. And then there's a public health perspective of what happens if people have access to these drugs, and then what can the government do to ease the effects of, drug abuse and drug addiction, and how can they get involved in that? And so that's, again, a push and pull of should we legalize drugs? And if we do, what other steps can we take to ensure that we're protecting people to the best of the government's ability? And then internet regulation debates over internet regulation, including issues such as net neutrality and online censorship, involve weighing individual freedoms, such as freedom of expression and access to information, against government efforts to regulate online content and protect users from harm. So that's a really new one, and I think that is a really hot topic in politics, because obviously the government and the laws that we have are generally pretty old. And so with things like the internet and social media, these present entirely new issues that haven't been addressed at the legislative level yet. So there's some things that we're constantly talking about. That's why we're constantly seeing, tech companies being asked to come to Congress for hearings and being questioned, because the government is kind of trying to figure out what their place is in regulating these issues. So for example, with all of the misinformation problems on Facebook and Instagram, there was the question of, should the government allow these platforms to promote and push forward these inaccurate misinformation posts, or is it not the government's place to say something and step in, because that's just people expressing their speech and that's people consuming speech? So those, again, this all kind of ties back to the government versus no government debate of policymaking. It's pretty consistent across the board. Again, these issues have been very different with drugs and internet regulation, but it all kind of comes down to what the government's place is. And that is sort of what policymaking ties back to a lot of the times. Ideology and Economics. I will hand it over to Debbie now.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to go over ideology and economics. So basically, there's liberal ideologies, conservative, and libertarian that we're going to cover. Liberal ideologies favor more government regulation of the marketplace. So they believe that the government should have more rules and more say in how businesses operate so that the people can be protected, consumers can be protected, um, and the environment as well. And they want the government to play a bigger role in making sure that things are fair and stable in the economy. Conservative ideologies favor fewer regulations, and they think that the government should stay out of the way, and leave it to business owners to do better. They think that um, things will get sorted out in the market without interference from the government. And libertarian ideologies, I always got confused because that's not really one that we talk about that often. But libertarians value individual freedom, limited government, and personal responsibility. So basically, they want little or no regulation at all of the marketplace beyond protection of property rights and voluntary trade. Um, so they think the government should not be involved, and should respect people's property rights. And yeah, and so then there's fiscal policy, that consists of actions taken by Congress and the president to influence economic conditions. And it includes Keynesian and supply side economics. I mean, supply side, yeah, positions. So Keynesian is when the government spends more money during tough times. And then supply side is when the government cuts taxes and regulations so businesses can grow more. So basically during with Keynesian economics, it prioritizes short-term stabilization and making sure that things get back to where they were. And supply side, they want business to grow, they want more jobs, just growth overall. And so monetary policy consists, oh my gosh, of actions taken by the Federal Reserve to influence interest rates, which affects broader economic conditions. So the Fed is an independent agency which seeks to achieve maximum employment and price stability. So yeah, so basically, monetary policy is about the government controlling how much money is going around, the interest rates, and the Federal Reserve is kind of like the boss, and they keep things stable by adjusting how much money is available, how much is flowing around in the economy, and how much interest you have to pay. So for social policy, these are basically the ideologies of liberal, conservative, and libertarians. So liberals generally favor more national government involvement. So when it comes to big issues like education and public health, they want there to be consistent rules, and most of the power to be given to the federal government in making sure that things are the same across all states. So they want less responsibility left to the states and more in the federal government. So then everything is equal across the country. Conservative ideologies favor less national government, less involvement with the government, the federal government, to address social issues, and they want more responsibility left to the states. They think that like local leaders and state leaders understand the people better, and because of that, they'll put forward actions and agendas that will help their community more than what the federal government would know. So yeah, so basically it's just that issue of federalism again. Like liberal ideologies want more power in the federal government's hands, while conservative ideologies want more power in state government's hands. And libertarian ideologies favor little national or state. Like they don't want either, except when it comes to protecting private property or individual liberties. So they think this national and state government should stay out of the way, and individual freedom should be the primary goal, and that should reign, except when it comes to protecting people's rights. So policy trends concerning the level of government involvement in social issues reflect the success of conservative or liberal perspectives in political parties. So basically, you'll see different approaches in the government to solving different issues based on which political party is in power. So the trends really depend on which party's in power because of polarization. Because recently, well, not even just recently, like things have kind of split off a lot. There's not much compromise and agreement, bipartisanship. So um what's happening in the world and like well, I mean like the policies being passed um definitely reflect what party is in power. So we're gonna do an FRQ practice. Oh, actually, we're gonna go to discussion questions first. So first, the first question is, how do the core political values vary across political ideologies? So I'll give you a minute to answer that. When it comes to answering this question, I would say that just think of a few political values. So like the role of government or social issues or equal rights or individual freedom, things like that. And then think about each ideology and how they respond to that value. Yeah, I'm seeing responses in the chat. This is good. This is great. I'm seeing really good responses. Yeah, you guys definitely got this. Hey, great. Yeah. So, when it comes to core political values, like let's say, I think the big one is like federalism, the role of government. Um, oop, yeah, the role of government. So when it comes to that, I saw someone say in in one of the comments about how um liberals tend to want more involvement from the federal government, conservatives want more power to the state governments, and libertarians want involvement from none. That would be a great answer for this as well. Um, and when it comes to like another example of a political value, I would say is like equality. So liberals value equality of opportunity, social justice, government intervention, while conservatives want equality of opportunity, and they think that, but they also believe in like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and making sure that there's a individual responsibility and that people are responsible for their own situation. And libertarians, they oppose government efforts to, well, they don't want government intervention, so they oppose government efforts to enforce equality, and they want like free market, free flow. Or when it comes to, I'm trying to think of another individual freedoms, like liberals prioritize individual freedom and rights. Conservatives also prioritize that, but of course, personal responsibility. And libertarians also, well, I think that is one of the things that every ideology prioritizes, like, because this is a democracy, like everyone wants individual freedoms and liberties that are granted to us in the Constitution. But I think the level to which each ideology supports that is different. Libertarians want individual freedom, like that is the utmost goal. And then I would say conservatives, and then I would say liberals. Because I think liberals are more likely to want the government to intervene and also put in laws that restricts individual freedom if it's for the good of the community. So like for gun control and gun law, like they would rather that be limited for the good of the community rather than have everyone have access to that. So that's one. So the next question is, how do political candidates use polling data to shape their campaigns? Oh wait, you guys have already started. Ooh, maybe I spent too long on that first one. But yeah, how do political candidates use polling data to shape their campaigns? I see some great answers. I'm scrolling up. Yeah. These are great. These are great answers. Yeah, for sure. So they can use polling data to change their strategy and how they're reaching out to voters. So if they see a certain area is not getting, well, like especially with swing states, if you think about that, if the polls are showing that this state is a swing state, the voters are undecided, then a candidate might spend more time trying to get the voters to sway towards them. Um, and it also helps them track their momentum and track their progress and see whether or not they're going to do well in a state or not do well, or even in a district. It depends on what kind of election it is. And also it helps them to allocate more resources towards that area as well. Um, so having more people who are canvassing, phone banking, text banking to that area, making more volunteers show up there, more speeches, those kinds of things. And the last question is, what are the largest factors of political socialization? How can they influence ideology? I see that a lot of people have already started answering that, and the responses look pretty good. Yeah, these are great. These are really, really good. Yeah. So I see a lot of family, community, social media. Yeah. Education. Yes, for sure. Yes. Oh, party polarization is just like how just the widening of values and beliefs between political parties over time. Well, not even just over time, but like with different issues. But I would say especially recently, like if you think about conservatives versus um liberals, like just that divide and how polarized um the parties have become. So that like even on issues that in the past would have been there would have been more compromise, now there's less compromise and people are sticking more to what their parties are saying instead of compromising on issues. So yeah, polar as in polar opposites, like they're not, there's lack of compromise, people are kind of stuck in the mindset. But yeah, so political socialization, oh my gosh. Okay, family, education, peers, so like your friends. So if all your friends are conservative, you might be more open to hearing that side and changing your opinion accordingly. Religion as well, like if everyone at your church believes a certain way and that's all you're hearing, you're not hearing diverse opinions or perspectives, you might lean that way. Your community, your culture, your education, media as well. Like media has played a big role in it, I would say, because a lot of news outlets lean a certain way. So, Fox News, CNN, finding unbiased news outlets is kind of rare, I would say now. Like, well, PBS, I think the New York Times, honestly, I think that leans more liberal, but I would say that that's still closer to the middle than other. Um, Yeah, so in AP Gov, my teacher actually showed me a map of like all the news outlets and where they fell on the political spectrum. So if you can, you should take a look at one of those online. Um, because it's really interesting to see like how over time people only listen to news that agrees with what they think. And so then we're more likely to be solidified in our ideologies. So yeah, these are all great responses. Thank you all for participating. And yeah.
All right. Hey guys, I'm back. If any of the other hosts want to join me on this, feel free. But we are going to do another practice FRQ. So this is a line graph, a line chart that you are going to have to examine. It's another example of one of the data like analysis questions you will be receiving on the AP government exam on Monday. So respond to all parts of the question. A, define party polarization, which we just went over. So I hope that makes a little more sense. B, identify a trend shown in the graph above. C, describe two causes of party polarization in Congress. And D, describe one effect of party polarization on congressional policymaking. So we'll give you guys until 9:20 to answer that, since this is a rather quick one in my opinion. Oh, and another important thing, pay attention to the key. Pay attention to the key and what is going on in the graph. Are there increases? Are there decreases? Is the graph stagnant? Obviously, it might be a little hard to tell, especially like with the colors, but the Senate is in the dark black, and then the House is in like the very light gray. Yes, and look at the axis titles, as Amara said.
And also as you answer, make sure you look at the action word. So like define, identify, describe, as you answer it.
I see part A is coming in. These are already looking so good. You guys are so good. You guys are cooking. You're gonna be so ready for Monday. Trust. What else? Yeah, I think that covers everything. Yeah, pay attention to the axis words. Look at the axis titles. Look at the key. If there's anything specifically significant in either the explanatory or the response variables. So defining that, the explanatory variables would be the years. So from 1879 to 2007. And then your response variables would be the ideological distance between parties on the y-axis. If that is going to be a big help in explaining some of the questions, the latter half of the question, especially in like part C and part D, use it. Again, if you want to be specific and you know what to say, be specific. But if you do have to explain a little more because you do forget like a name of a term or whatnot, go ahead and yap. And in this scenario, this is like something to pay attention to that you can't yap about. It's currently 9:18. I think 9:20 was a little too short time. I'll give you guys until let's do 9:22. But for the most part, I'm seeing a lot of answers of part A and part B. So yeah, let's just go over those for now. So part A, define party polarization. A lot of you keep asking this one, even though we just went over it, just to remember, like I said in the chat, when we're thinking of party polarization, polar as in polar opposites. So it's the extreme ideological distance between the two political parties. And in this case, it would be liberal and conservative. So this one, again, like we said in the beginning of the presentation, skim through the questions first before you go ahead and look at the graph, because this is something that you can answer without having to look at the graph. So you would just define that, and then you're done with part A. Part B, identify a trend shown in the graph above. Demi, do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yeah, so as you look at the graph, you might notice, wait, let's see, myself. Oh yeah, I'm able to scroll in. You can might notice the dip. So how it goes up, it goes down, and then it goes back up. So in your response, you can say from this year to that year, it increased and then it went down and then it went up. Like just basically, like it said, identify a trend. That's all you really have to do. You can just say, this is what I see in the graph, and you would get a point for it. And also looking between House and Senate. So you could say that there was more or less ideological, yeah, I said that right, between between in the House versus the Senate as well.
I see some part C's coming in. I'm going to wait a few more minutes for that. And once you're done with part C, go ahead and answer part D. But yeah, just pay attention to those explanatory and response variables in the graph and the axis titles. You guys are doing really well given the time constraints. And just so we know, we are going to be taking another 5-minute break after this, and then we're going to go ahead and do the other half of the cram quiz and finish up for tonight. You guys have been so amazing so far, so thank you. And I'm just going to wait for a few more of C to part. Nice English. I'm going to wait for more part C's to come in. What's the difference between grants and mandates? I would say the difference between grants and mandates would be specifically that when you are given a grant, you can do a certain amount of actions with that given like amount of money that's given. And then with mandates, it's like we're giving you, there goes my ring. You have to do what is given with the money. Like for example, mandate sounds like mandatory. So think more so like, oh, the federal government is giving me this amount of money and they're telling me to do this with this money. So I have to do this with this money. Where so with a grant, it's more so I'm given this money and there are a certain amount of things I can do with it, but I was not given a specific action to do with it, if that makes a little more sense. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and answer part C and D. These answers are looking beautiful. Describe 2 causes of party polarization in Congress. One major reason that there can be a polarization in Congress is if one chamber one political party holds power in one chamber and then another political party holds power in another chamber, that can cause sort of like a gridlock or like butting heads, because you're going to have those extreme beliefs in one chamber and those extreme beliefs in another chamber, and there's not a lot of room for compromise. So that can be a big issue. And then another big thing is just the idea of how when bills are passed or laws are being passed, it's either going to, you know, because of those extreme ideological differences, not a lot of things are going to be passed. Or when something is passed, it's either going to be on one extreme or on another extreme, which you guys are getting, and it's wonderful. And then Demi, you want to do part D?
Yeah, I can do that. Part D, describe one effect of party polarization on congressional policymaking. So honestly, for this one, because you described a cause, you could describe an effect of it. So an effect could be um like a stalemate on issues. So an issue like, let's say, gun control, like having not being able to pass anything because there's not people are not enough people agree with it in Congress, and there's kind of this like, I'd say, inertia, like everyone's just kind of stuck where they are and no one's going to compromise no matter what they hear because it's just so polarized. Um and let me look at what you guys are saying. Another effect could be, yeah, the legislation passed could be extreme. Yeah, if a majority of the people in Congress lean one way, or if the House is conservative or the House is liberal, then all the policies you're seeing could be um leaning that way or just fully that way. Yeah, this is great. You guys definitely got this.
Yeah, I agree. You guys are doing really well. So that is it for now. We are going to go ahead and take our 5 minute break, our well deserved 5 minute break. Where is that again? That is not it. And I forgot where it is. There it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, you got it.
Okay, so we will see you guys in 5.
Hi guys, welcome back from the break. We're gonna wait a couple more minutes and then we're gonna continue the cram quiz from earlier and finish up the last 10 questions. So I'm gonna set up my screen share while we wait for everyone to come back, and we're gonna continue off right where we left off on question number 10, and Kate just posted the link to the quiz. All right, can you all see the quiz? And again, the link is in the chat, and then I'll also put up the QR code for a minute. So I'll go ahead and join, and we'll wait for some more people to get on. But y'all did really great on the first half of the quiz, so I'm excited to see these last 10 questions because I know y'all are gonna do amazing. Okay, I'll wait like 30 more seconds to get some more people. And again, the link is in the chat, as well as scan this QR code if that's easier for you. Okay, I'll start reading this question. So why might pollsters use oh, we already did this one. Did we? We'll do it again. Why might pollsters use stratified sampling techniques when conducting national political polls? So again, think about what stratified means, separating people into those different groups. Think about how that might benefit a poll. And we talked about the validity and reliability of polls, and how, it's a very scientific process and we want to make sure that they're as accurate as possible. So think about how using the stratified sampling technique would benefit this and work towards that end goal of really reliable polls. So I will give everyone a few minutes or a couple minutes to pick an answer, and then we'll go over this one and then we'll keep going. I do think we already did this one, but the quiz took off from there, so good practice. All right, I'm gonna reveal the answer in about 10 seconds, so go ahead and put in your final guesses. Okay, revealing. So to ensure representation from all segments of society based on demographics like age and race, again, we just want to make sure that all those different groups that we pick people from to sample are equally represented. So that's why we would use stratified. On to the next one, the first new question. All right, y'all are doing amazing. Which pattern best characterizes public opinion data regarding US presidential job approval ratings? So either A, they only fluctuate during an election year, B, they tend to decrease over time, C, they tend to increase over time, or D, they remain constant throughout a term. So think about how the general public feels about a president throughout their term, whether throughout just the full 4 years, throughout their re-election season. How do voters feel about sitting presidents? I'll give it another 10 or so seconds. So put in your final guesses and we'll go over this one. All right, I'm gonna reveal the answer. And the correct answer is they tend to decrease over time. So we'll go over this one a little bit. Again, public opinion or presidential job approval ratings is essentially a poll that's done on the American public to see how they feel about the president. Do they think the president is doing a good job or not? So generally when a president comes into office, they tend to have a higher approval rating because people are more excited about this new president. They're shiny and new and they have all these ideas and, goals for their term as president. And as time goes on, it's pretty inevitable that presidents will have to deal with like difficult situations. They'll have policies or laws that won't be able to pass. They'll have, just like failures and things that look bad to the American public. So their approval rating tends to decrease just as they have to, deal with the many different tasks that come with being president, that come along with being president. So that's kind of why it tends to decrease rather than increase over time. Just think about how you feel when, a new president, a new person is elected. Everyone kind of has a little bit of hope. They're excited about what's to come. And as time, passes and reality sets in, people tend to kind of have lesser opinions of the president. So that is that answer. If you guys have any questions and want me to clarify a little bit more in the chat, just put that there. Next question, which entity provides guidelines for ethical practices in polling? The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, the Department of Justice, or the American Association for Public Opinion Research. So think about who would provide this kind of guidance. Would it be a government agency? Would it be another type of group? So think about that as you're answering this. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds, put in your final answers. Okay, and the answer is the American Association for Public Opinion Research. And this is not a government entity. This is sort of a separate entity that deals with these guidelines and this sort of guidance on how to conduct the best polls. It is not the FCC. The FCC deals with things like internet regulation, broadband, all of these, things like TV networks and phone, companies, all of these different sort of big national communication issues. That's what the FCC deals with. But for polling, it's going to be the American Association for Public Opinion Research, which the name kind of is pretty straightforward about, and that's exactly what they do. All right, next question. What is the most likely consequence of a constitutional amendment that requires all federal elections to use ranked choice voting based on current trends in public opinion data? So think about what ranked choice voting is and how that would impact, what kind of impact that would have. I'll wait a couple more seconds. A lot of ranked choice voting. So think about how we currently vote and how that's sort of, very binary way of voting versus if we had a ranked choice and people could kind of flesh out their opinions more on the ballot. All right, I'm going to reveal the answer. Increased representation of third-party candidates. So let's think about how difficult it is for third-party candidates to win with our current ballot system, right? Because right now you have to pick one option, right? It's either, and the two major parties, the parties that have a chance of winning, are Democrats or Republicans. So if you, let's say, want a Democrat to win, you're not going to quote unquote waste your vote voting for a third party candidate when you know that your candidate, your Democratic candidate, needs all the votes that they can get. Whereas with ranked choice voting, you could still rank, let's say, your top choice Democrat at the top, but then your second choice third party candidate as second. And it wouldn't have to be this end all be all. Or rather, if you really love this third party candidate, but if that person doesn't win, you would rather have a Democrat than a Republican, you could rank that third party at the top, and you wouldn't be wasting your vote, because if that third party candidate didn't win, then your vote would simply go to the second person you ranked, which would be the Democrat, and they could still be able to win. So ranked choice would just allow for different parties and different people to come in, because it's not just that binary Democrat or Republican that would be able to win. B, decrease in voter turnout due to complexity. That could be a possibility, but that isn't really anything that has been proven or studied. So that's why that wouldn't be it. Shift in policy focus towards urban areas. Not necessarily, because the impact would be that you would get more third-party candidates getting represented, and that doesn't necessarily mean those third-party candidates represent more urban areas or more urban interests. And desimplification of the voting process. Again, not necessarily, because the ranked system might be more difficult for some people to understand, but that's kind of not a standardized thing. For some people, it might be simpler, for some, it might be more difficult. So the only one that's kind of very straightforward is increased representation of third-party candidates, just because it would be easier for them to gain votes and get on the ballot when voters are not only focused on Democrat versus Republican. Alrighty, next question. Where does a bill go first if it is introduced in Congress? So this is a review from a couple days ago when we went over that big flow chart of how a bill becomes a law. But also think back to, whenever middle school or a few years ago when you guys were shown the video of how a bill becomes a law, a little cartoon video. That will be helpful. Exactly, that song, I'm Just a Bill. I'll wait a couple more seconds. So think about what each of these is, what the speaker's office is, who is the speaker, Senate or House leader's desk, a full vote, or a committee review. All right, I'm revealing, and y'all did great. It is committee review. So again, a committee is sort of a focused group of 10 to 30 legislatures who are focused on a specific policy area. So if, let's say, a law has to do, or a bill has to do with agriculture, it's going to go to the Agriculture Committee, and they're going to review that bill first before they send it to the full House or the full Senate to vote on. And then after that, it, gets voted on the full floor vote, and then it goes to the president, and that's the overall process. But again, it starts with the committee, which is kind of a concentrated and focused group of legislators who can look at that bill more closely because their specialty and their focus is in that area. So that is the first step. But y'all did great with this one. Next up, what would likely occur if a significant proportion of the US population began to support libertarian ideologies? So think about what libertarians stand for, what kind of things they support, and I'll give y'all a couple minutes. And this is one of those third parties, so think about what they believe in compared to, let's say, the Democrats or Republicans who are in power right now. I'll wait a couple more minutes. I'm sorry about the laptop moving a little bit. I'm like balancing it. If you've noticed, I've been in a different location each day of the crayons, in different study rooms and things in the library. So today I'm in a different room with a different setup. So a little bit of something different each day, but I'll give you guys a couple more seconds and I'll reveal the answer. So the government might be pressured to reduce its involvement in economic and social issues. So again, libertarians are the full hands-off, like very minimal government people. So basically just least government involvement both in social issues and in economic issues, meaning most of the rights and decision making being left to state governments and to individual people. So if most people started leaning towards the libertarian side, towards libertarian ideologies, they wouldn't be too happy if the government enacted a policy that sort of extended their reach and made bigger steps in bigger social programs or bigger government funding for things. So that's essentially it. If people support these kind of ideologies, the government is going to be forced to sort of mold to these new ideologies. Next question. Y'all did great on this one, by the way. 93% is amazing. Next up, what impact has the Great Society social reforms had on modern American political discourse about welfare policy? I'll give y'all a few minutes on that one. Think about the Great Society, when it was implemented, what kind of things came along with it, kind of policies, all of these things. Think about who was president when the Great Society policies were enacted. All right, I'll give just a couple more seconds. And let's reveal. All right, so they are often cited by progressives as foundational for current welfare programs seeing expansion. So quick review of the Great Society was the social reforms enacted by LBJ, 99% sure, in the 60s, and it was basically an expansion to a lot of the welfare programs that we have today. Things like Medicare, the focus was on reducing and eliminating poverty, racial injustice. It was sort of a prime example of progressive policies, the government getting involved, the government spending more money to sort of address these societal issues that were so entrenched at the time and enacting new policies to try to fix them. So, this was in the 60s, and it's sort of a foundation. It's sort of looked back on as like an example of what progressive policies could look like when enacted. And, if we were to enact progressive policies again nowadays, this is cited as an example of when they were really successful and worked well. But y'all did awesome on this one, 75%. That's great. And we'll go to the next one. What does fiscal policy refer to in terms of economic regulation? So what do people mean by fiscal policy? I'll give y'all a couple minutes for this one. I'll give just a couple more seconds, put in your final guesses. And we're almost done. We're at 17 out of 20, so y'all have been doing great tonight. Yeah, a lot of these questions kind of venture into the other APs. We had a little bit of AP stats in here today, some AP macro, lots of different things. All right, I'll reveal the use of government spending and taxation to influence the economy. So fiscal policy is essentially money policy. So how is the government taking, to what extent is government collecting taxes, and how are they using those taxes to then spend on different sectors of the economy? So are we choosing to spend more on military? Are we choosing to spend more on healthcare? Are we choosing to spend less overall and collect less taxes? Are we choosing to collect more taxes? Essentially, it's policy on money. How is the government collecting and distributing and using money? But y'all did really well on that one, 94%, almost perfect. Next up, which outcome is most likely if a central bank decides to increase interest rates significantly? So again, a little bit of fiscal policy in this one. Give y'all a couple more seconds. The thing about fiscal policy and how increased interest rates can have an impact on the overall economy and on people. I'll reveal in a couple of seconds. All right. The correct answer is decreased borrowing and slowed economic growth. So this one's pretty straightforward. If interest rates are higher, it's going to be more expensive and harder to borrow money. So people are going to be deterred from doing that. And we see that happening. This is a very current question with, obviously currently interest rates are pretty high in the economy. And so we're seeing the impacts of that. And obviously as interest rates get higher for things like mortgages, for buying homes, people are deterred from doing so because it's just more expensive. So people have a tendency to sort of say, I'll wait it out. I'll wait until interest rates get lower and then make that purchase as a way to, save money. And again, if people are borrowing less, they're buying less things, this can lead to a slowed economic growth because there's less money circulating in the economy. Next question. What role does a conference committee play when there is a disagreement between the House and Senate versions of a social policy bill? So again, back to legislation and lawmaking. All right, I will reveal the answer. Reconcile differences to create single unified bill for both chambers to vote on again. So essentially, if a bill is introduced, it is seen in both houses, and the House and the Senate disagree on what amendments they want, on what they want the final version of the bill to be. Then a conference committee gets created to essentially smooth out those differences and come to an agreement so that they can decide on a final bill, vote on it in both chambers, and then send it off to the president. So it's essentially a committee that's created to even out those differences when, we can't get to the next step if people aren't agreeing on that. But y'all got 100%, so that is incredible. We'll do our next question, which is our last one. Which group would most likely endorse a policy that expands federal funding for education? All right, let's reveal. Progressives who believe in proactive government roles in promoting social equity through education. So again, think about which group, which political ideology group believes in more government spending, more government funding, and the government getting involved to address issues rather than hands-off approaches and saying, let people figure it out on their own. So a progressive group would want more federal funding for education, with the thinking that with more funding for education, public education, then children across the board have access to more resources, which then in turn leads to higher educational outcomes. Maybe then more kids go to college, etc., social mobility, all of these different sort of domino effects that come from something like education. a progressive would want to invest more in that because they'd want to put government money towards helping out the general population and towards sort of easing social inequity, which can happen when obviously some public schools receive a lot less funding than others. So by pushing a little bit more funding, then we get some more equity across the board with social outcomes like that. All right, and that is the last question for today. So y'all did so great on this cram quiz. I'm gonna close it out and stop sharing. Again, please do the survey that's getting sent out in the chat, which just lets us know how we're doing. And thank you all so much for participating in the cram quiz. You guys did so great. Thank you for answering all the questions. And if my other hosts want to come on and say anything, but we'll be here for the next couple minutes if you guys have any last questions. But thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, you guys did amazing. I know this is like a unfortunate repeat of night one. It was kind of a nightmare, but we all got through it. It's fine. You guys did amazing. Thank you guys for your patience as well. And you guys are doing really, 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 really well with those questions, especially concept analysis, which I know a lot of you guys weren't confident in, but given your answers, you guys will do well, no problem. So you all have fives on Monday. I can assure you, you will.
And also, just a reminder, we're going to be on Zoom tomorrow, just because there's been so many tech issues, generally. So, when you go on Crowdcast, there will be a Zoom link there, and then you can be transferred here. So, yeah. And you guys all did great, amazing today, and throughout this this is night 4, right? So you guys have done amazing the past 4 nights, and I'm excited to see you all tomorrow.
Yeah, you guys have all been so, so great. Thank you for cramming with us. Again, make sure to follow us on socials. Make sure to fill out the survey as you head out. We hope to see you guys tomorrow for our final night. It is our cram finale. You guys are testing on Monday, which, by the way, brave souls for testing on Monday. That is so loaded. But yeah, thank you guys so much. You all are amazing. You guys are chefs. You're cooking. Happy May 4th to those who celebrate. May the 4th be with you. And we hope you guys have a good night.
Have a good night, guys.
We'll see y'all on Zoom tomorrow. Have a great Sunday. Get some rest for our final day. We're gonna do great tomorrow, and we're gonna get y'all so ready. You're already ready, but we're gonna just close it all off, and do great tomorrow. So we'll see y'all on Zoom.
As for the link for the Zoom tomorrow, if you go on Crowdcast, it might redirect you here. If not, they should just email you the link either sometime tonight or like early tomorrow, so you'll have it. All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, guys.